I want to add dates, and therefore let's bring in another iron row, and I'll have my dates sit next to each other. So I'll add size SM3 here, offset stays at 3, and I'll give this a label of from, and instead of an iron input, I use iron date time. Now, I already mentioned that I would want to configure this in more detail than I did before. Because if you check the official Ionic Framework docs, which we've done a couple of times throughout the course because they're really useful, if you go to your components reference there and you have a look at the iron date time, you can read a lot about it. And it's definitely worth reading that to make sure that you're using this component in exactly the way you want to use it. Here you can learn all about the different date formats it supports and how you can configure that. And I will use some of these features in our component here. So on this iron date time here, I want to set my own display format with the display-format attribute here. And I want to start with a written month, which is encoded with 3 capital M's. And you can learn all about that formatting here in these docs. So 3 capital M's start with a month that is written out, or that is actually written as text, but then shortened. That is what we start with. Then I want to have the day, 2 digits, and then the full year with 4 digits. That's the display format. The display format is what's displayed when we're not having the picker opened. For the picker, we can set a separate format. So for that spinner that opens when we tap the picker. And there, I want to have a different format where we have a shorter year, and that comes first. Then we have the month, and then we have days. And this is also there to showcase to you how you can configure that. Now, I also want to set a min and a maximum date. And of course, that now depends on the place we picked. The minimum date should be the minimum date the place gives us. So if a place is available from January 1st to May the 31st, well, then I want to make sure that the minimum date for this from picker is our minimum date of the offered place, and the maximum date is the maximum date of the offered place. And I'm not setting a maximum of December 31st in 2025 if the place isn't available there. So we'll have to bind min and max dynamically here. I'll come back to what we bind them later. I'll also add ngModel here, and ngModel right now is added like this, but I will later change this because we'll actually add a mode where we pre-select dates if you chose random dates in that action sheet. And therefore, we might actually initialize this with a default value here. Now, of course, we also need a date, and that could be date from, but you can choose whatever you want. And it should be required. And yeah, that looks good to me. Of course, I don't just need one such date. I will copy that instead because I need a second date picker for the to date. And here we need no offset because it will set next to the from date. The display format and the picker format is the same. Min and max now, however, are different, or min is different. Max is the same. It's the maximum date of the place we picked. But min, of course, has to be the date we picked here. Because if I start at January the 10th, then I can't pick an ending date that is before that date. So here I want to get access to my control, and therefore I can add a local reference to the first date time, which I'll name start date control, and you can name it however you want. And I set this equal to ngModel to get access to this object Angular creates behind the scenes. And now we can use the start date control here to dynamically bind the min date. And I'll bind it to start date control.value. Because the value I picked in the first picker as at the starting date is the minimum date here. And yes, that technically allows for 1 day states without any night in between, but I will keep it like this. Obviously, you could add extra complexity and add some code in your TypeScript file to calculate a new date, which is the date picked in the first date time plus 1 day. But that is not really about Ionic. It's just a vanilla TypeScript, JavaScript, Angular logic, and therefore not what I want to focus on here. Instead, I'd rather show you different features of different parts of Ionic. So we have that min value bound. We'll bind max later. The name here should be date2, and of course, this is also required. Now some buttons would be nice. And actually, I have my book button here already. I'll just expand this to be a block styled button to take the full width. And I will add it in my grid here into a row where I will use the same sizing as I do on the other rows. So size SM6, offset SM3. I'll add that down here. And now in this iron column here, we can add this button. However, I'll not call on book place upon a click anymore. Instead, this button should submit the form. And therefore, I'll set the type of this button to submit. Looks good to me. Now we have a button, now we have a form, but this will not work because we're not binding min and max on our dates yet. So let's do that next, and let's make sure that we generally finish up this book a place page.